My name's Glen. I was asked to speak about last week, and in the last few days I've been on holiday, so I've had very little time to prepare, but I told them that I would have very little time to prepare. So this is all just basically show and tell of some stuff that I've been working on. I haven't really concocted it to make a strong argument or anything. I'm just going to show some stuff that I've been thinking about and working on. And I encourage you all to just basically sing out with questions, because I have a few things to talk about, but I have been thinking about this stuff for a while, and so if there's stuff that you would like to know the background for, if I skip through something, if you've heard about something that's relevant, just shout it out, because that will actually help us cover the ground in the talk. Last year I helped to start a project called CSS Modules, which was pretty successful and has a bunch of people using it now, and I've used it very successfully. Earlier this year, a few months ago, Facebook came out with a project called Create Reactor, which is something I'm going to be using. How many people have used React here? Cool. How many people that haven't used React but do another JavaScript thing in day-to-day, like Angular or Ember or something like that? Right? Because a lot of the same lessons are pretty transferable. That's well more than half the people here have experience with one of the two, so that's good, because my talk is going to be very specific about working in that environment. And as a result, I'm going to be framing everything within Create React App. If you haven't used Create React App, this is the first time that Facebook have been deliberate about shepherding or kind of their first foray into stewardship of the React community in a way that Facebook doesn't use themselves. So they've got this team, this core team, mostly based out of the London office, and they've come up with this, and they've also come up with Yarn is their latest kind of product, which is an NPM drop-in NPM replacement, basically. This, to me, marks a huge shift in the way JavaScript community kind of takes on new ideas, because this is a zero configuration thing. Anything in this, anything they add to this, they're implicitly endorsing. And previously, and we've seen things like the JavaScript fatigue post and the learning how to be a JavaScript developer in 2016. There's so much to learn, and there's this huge proliferation of stuff. Part of that is because there was no strong leadership around what makes a good kind of ecosystem to work with in JavaScript. This is the first step in that direction. And when it came out, there was a question that came up, which I probably could find with a bit of research, but again, if I had prepared. Somebody did a poll on Twitter about what people are using for styling in React apps, and about 50% of people said CSS modules, which was well more than any of the CSS and JavaScript things. But a question came up on this issue tracker in amongst a lot of noise, where they said that they didn't want to commit to anything that required a build step. So if you have used or looked at CSS modules, this was the post that I wrote in August last year. Thanks, Johnny. He's gone completely missing, but back last year he was a sign of good design. Basically, CSS modules will compile these class names, and it does it by hooking into your build process. So your CSS file goes through Webpack, or it goes through JSPM, or it goes through Browserify, and it gets changed. It gets changed into class names that look like this, right? That was a fundamental dependency of that approach. Create React App said, we don't want to introduce any dependencies on any build step. We don't think any of the solutions are good enough to endorse. And I was looking around and thinking, in fact, I might just take a moment here, because I wanted to create, this is all going to be live, and I just run Create React App MelbCSS. This is just going to take forever, so I'll just keep talking. I'll show you the dependency folder afterwards. It is it hides a lot of things from you. You never wanted to make as many decisions as they've made. Because I was looking at the other stuff, right? So the stuff that you could try to integrate styling, CSS, into JavaScript ecosystem without a build step. And they're all these, what they call CSS-in-JS or inline styles kind of approaches, one of which is JSS. That was actually pretty good. And you see these styles like this. You have these objects, right? Camel case names, you see them very... there's a good example here. No, there's no good examples. So, like, the reason, and in fact I said this in my original blog post, the reason we wanted to, all the people who are involved in CSS modules, is that we liked CSS. We wanted to keep writing as close to CSS as possible because we thought that we actually had learned how to work with CSS, and all of these solutions that were CSS and JavaScript seemed like they were written by people who'd never really kind of got to grips with CSS and understood when it actually works quite well. They just were like, okay, well, let's approach it from a technical perspective. How would we do styling in CSS, in JavaScript? So there was JSS. Earlier this year, I was aware of this thing called Aphrodite, which is really, really good. It's at a Khan Academy. It's well documented. It's well thought out. You have this kind of thing. You have these spans with class names and CSS with styles.red, and you have this stuff down here, right? Same sort of stuff. But now you can do media queries, which is great. And pseudo selectors, which is also great, except I don't know why they've done that and that, but this turns red on hover, okay. So I'm not like, yeah, so I've dug through these projects actually a lot deeper than I am kind of conveying. But these examples kind of, to me, always put me off because they don't look like CSS. They have this jarring effect. And once I looked into them, I don't think that anything they offered was worth that breaking with a language that actually works pretty well. Another one of note is this one called JSX Style. It's mainly of note because Pete Hunt was one of the core creators of React itself, and this looks, where is his example? He introduces these ideas of blocks and inline elements and trying to, there's another one called, actually quite a good one called, it is React Native Web. Which is actually quite cool because it's basically taking the exact same model of React Native except rendering everything with web sites. So it has things like images, list view, progress bar, scroll view. It's like feels like a native app, but it's rendering to the web. That's, to me, is like potentially a really good idea. I don't think it works all that well for the kind of problems I'm solving. But taking something that actually works, which is if you're getting to work with React Native, it kind of does work, and applying it to the web, I think, is a pretty clever approach. Whereas this is sort of halfway there. You have these different kind of blocks, block and inline, and all of these properties just get kind of written in line, which to me is going to break down. The one I really hated was stuff like this, where you have to write like inline color black, but hover color yellow, and so you have a hover X for every possible property that you could have. And there's this jarring kind of nature of these designs, like the developer experience of writing styles like this. I mean, why would anyone switch from doing CSS even to support what I was trying to do, which is basically something that could work without any build time dependencies. So a couple of months ago, I was chatting to a few people, and we came up with a project called Style Components, which isn't designed to be a replacement for CSS, certainly CSS modules particularly, not yet. It's just taking a different set of constraints and seeing what the API looks like. Right? It also has quite a different kind of profile once it's all rendered and stuff like that. And generally, it's at the moment it's an experiment, but it does feel really good to work with. So I'm going to show you what it's like to just refactor some simple CSS with it, and then take questions basically. But here's we have a beautiful website and a lovely logo, which is nice. And And this is pale violet red text on papaya whip background, which is beautiful, and it's all CSS2 colors. It's beautiful. Anyway, I'm going to show you what it looks like. The basic concept is that you have these chunks of, well, that's not selectable, it's not text. Very well prepared. You have these chunks of CSS, right? So just write CSS, and then we figure out all the other stuff. I'll get to this stuff in a minute. Let's just start. Happy hacking, thank you. Please open in the right window. I would like to run another port. So this is what Create React App is to work with. When you don't see how long it takes to install, it's brilliant. And basically it just generates this simple structure. And oh, tell me I did this right. I thought I was really clever by doing this ahead of time. Yeah, I was clever. I'll just show you, yeah, look how many, that's certainly not how many things, oh, maybe they improved it. That's a lot less node modules than I thought. Maybe my hard drive's full or something, I don't know. But what's nice about this is that you don't have to worry about it. You see how few files there are there. Everything they've done is wrapped up in this project called React Scripts. It's a good way to get started because you can eject, and so if you ever want to play with React, just do it like this. It's so much better than every other tutorial, every other boilerplate, everything. It's just because it's not only a way to get started, but it's a way to not worry about all the details, at least for a long while. And I think there's going to be more projects like Style Components, which are saying, okay, given these constraints, what can we do with a simple npm install that previously we'd had to do npm install, change your webpack config, move your directories around and do all these 10 other things. Because that's what, shipping JavaScript libraries was like basically last year, and it's changed. Okay, so this is, yep, thank you. I'm also just going to find and replace semicolons and get rid of them all because I do that now. And I'm going to turn off my helpful editor saying, why don't you have semicolons? Because I don't want to. I don't need them. Oh, do it again. Sorry, it just really bugs me now. It just looks like a typo. So this is a component. So if you haven't seen much React before, this is a nice little gentle thing. It's also, this is all built around Webpack, but they may divert from Webpack or use a different bundler or something in the future. The idea is you shouldn't worry about the what's behind the curtain. You can import assets, which is using Webpack, where you import an SVG file, and it actually it copies across a URL. And that's how your image will work. And you can import CSS. They don't do any CSS modules, as I said before, but it's just plain CSS. It's a really nice starting point. Also, you can't use Sass or anything like that with this project without doing some hacks. The idea is for it to be to only be able to really do the golden path of whatever Facebook says is okay with React, which I think is worth the effort to conform to at the moment. So we have a couple of, we have an element that's spinning. App logo has an animation, app logo spin, header, and a little bit of text. To convert this to, that's a bit big, isn't it? To convert this to style components, we install it, of course. Which is going to take a while because it's npm. Drink. Oh, they've changed the color of the progress bar. Good. All right. Well, actually wasn't too bad. I shouldn't be so snarky, but there we go. And you basically import this styled object, right? Which is your way of constructing these styled elements. The way you can tell the JavaScript that you have a chunk of CSS to work with. So So import style from style components, and we'll just make sure everything's working. Yeah, okay. And then I can say replace this outer wrapper, this outer div, with something with a name like outer, right? We say that it's a style div. Basically saying it's a div tag, but it's a styled one, and we give it some styles. So what do we have here? Text align center, that's a great demo. Okay. Text align center. So now when it renders, obviously it's over there, so we replace this whole thing with outer. And what we've done is we've replaced a div with a class name that is matching up with a CSS file that's over there to now a single unit, right? And this was an idea that really CSS modules kind of lent me towards working with. You work with these names, these single objects, and they have styled and structure together. And this was the best way we could come up with to integrate them, basically. This you may not have seen because I haven't seen many people use it in libraries. Not many people are aware of it. This is an ES6, what's called a tagged template literal, which means that it's basically a multi-line string, except me as a library author or anybody who wants to write a function, we can manipulate how that string is interpreted. So we can do some stuff that just isn't possible with normal strings in JavaScript, but it looks like strings in JavaScript. It's quite a forward-thinking addition to the spec. And that kind of makes the whole thing possible. We've got I've got a whole document basically explaining how they work, because the documentation online, they're really hardly used, but they're just part of ES6, so it's perfectly safe to use them. This is a good way to read about them, but I don't want to divert into that unless people are really interested. But basically they're just magic strings, and you can do whatever you like, right? So here we have a style div, and then we have another one called app header, which is another div. So we can do const header style div, right? And app header had a bit more. No. No, the grammar actually is a lot more difficult with C. I was actually talking about this today, doing automatic CSS semicolon insertion, but it just doesn't work. It's just, it's too difficult to handle new lines, basically, without semicolons. That said, I am, at the moment, the implementation is really resilient to them, and so this might just work. It does. But I'm going to break that in the next couple of days. So if you get in now, you can get I think we're up to version 1.1.1. You lock to that and you can get rid of semicolons. So this is sort of what I'm doing here. So here we have an image, app logo, same process, right? The idea was to keep as much of CSS as we could, right? So this is an image tag, so we say styled image. And we've got an alias for every HTML element, and if you want something that's not in the spec, like a web component, you can just add it as a string, like web component. But generally, the aliases are there. So that should work. So again, this should that blows up. But we just change this to logo and get rid of the class name. All the other properties, everything just passes through, and this should be kind of like completely invisible. These are just names, right? The same way that you would use class names. You just have to use capital letter, because if you put a lowercase letter, then React will treat it as a HTML tag. That's the extent of its cleverness about HTML tags. Lowercase tag, uppercase component. If you use an uppercase letter, so if you use something that you've never seen before, it just passes it through, except if it's got an uppercase character, in which case it will explode. because it's like, oh, that doesn't, yeah. So anyway, I've become quite comfortable with uppercase now. But yeah, you can mix and match here. You can even do things like, so in this header, we could say that the H2 is red. And this was big for me because I use this kind of direct descendants all the time in Sass, because you have a component, and like Steve was just talking about, there are cases where you will have more elements in a component than you would prefer. You might have to use a span, you might have to use a label, they might have to be in a particular order that the spec or your particular use case or screen readers demand. But you don't want to think about that when you're styling it. So having to attach a class to every single element or name every individual thing is not a good constraint, and it's something that all the other CSS and JS things you'll butt up against, because you have to reach into these components and change styles, where really that's, you know, anyone who's done Sass should be pretty comfortable with that. Same. Sorry? No, anything related to tag selectors doesn't work with React Native. We'll just throw an exception, basically saying that has no meaning. Because this all will work with React Native, but React Native has a direct one-to-one connection between styles and elements. So there's no kind of tag selectors or anything. I'll just leave that, but I'm going to actually make this pale violet red. Everything's got to be on brand. And the background is going to be papaya whip. Somebody make, papaya. Somebody makes a papaya whip ice cream, I'm going to buy it all.
So can you use all the CSS selectors, so all the operators?
Yeah, basically this whole thing compiles down to big old class name. Basically that chunk of CSS. It's almost, with Sass. You know, if you were thinking Sass or post CSS nested, is like the first version of this was generate a random class name and stick it and an open bracket on the front and a closed bracket on the back, and then throw it to post CSS. It is a really nice way to think about it, because the one thing that you don't actually care about is the class name. If you've started to use CSS modules or something, that the only thing it exists there is to be a name for your, you know, as your developers to use to communicate. The computer doesn't actually care about it at all. So let me just finish off. So we have an intro thing here. So const intro, that was a P. Font size large, right? Really nice and easy. Should just work. And so the reason why, the reason I like this design, the reason we pushed in this direction, is anything that clutters. Like, if you haven't done a lot of React, then you might think of having a JavaScript file with markup in it is a bit strange. It's like a weird kind of convolution. I certainly did before I started using it. But after a while, it feels like a pretty good unit of work. It is a component that has some structure and it has some methods. So you have some other things like element clicked would be a function, and that does some things, and that kind of does, you know, make sense to be fairly close to the markup itself, right? If you can keep these units nice and small and single purpose, then it does work. It does reduce the amount of things you have to think about when you're working on this stuff. But every time I saw something that has tries to put styles in I mean, even CSS modules is something like this. You have these two tokens. You have like a div and the class name. But what's worse is as you start to get, you know, particularly inline styles, you might do something like this. Oh, no, you need two because, yeah. And then you have to camel case because you're not using CSS anymore. Oh no, but you have to quote this, and you can't use semicolons, of course. And then you have, you know, something else. So like font weight 400. This thing to me breaks the fluidity of working with CSS when you have to jump out. The other thing that's annoying is that it breaks. Wait a sec. Sorry, I'm just going to quit Flux. Sorry?
Oh, you couldn't see the provider one.
Yeah. You actually shared up the
Wow. Oh, no, that's terrible. Sorry, no, it's just a performance art piece. All right, we'll just leave it on that? All right. Good. Well, I'm really glad. I would have been devastated. Right. We'll just cut that little bit out. So I hate this stuff that breaks your flow, because the idea is that this is the structure. This is how you used to write HTML. In fact, when you have like a big heavy form or something with lots of attributes, it becomes very hard to see the structure. Whereas I think JSX and HTML are really good at showing you structure, particularly in the absence of lots of noise. So this is why I like this approach. Same attributes that you use normally, all the styling information is flat, just like CSS. It just happens to be wrapped up in JavaScript. So I'll just show you some of the other things that you can do, because the idea is to be able to never use CSS. So we can get rid of the file. We have some global CSS here. And get rid of that as well. Oh, I have an animation as well. So we just have a nice little helper, so you don't have to Is that what it's called? Inject little? I think it is. Should work the same thing. Just make sure that that is working. Yep. So, and so you don't generally have too much global CSS, but it's nice to not have to grab another library or break, the one mental model. And the other thing is keyframes, because they are global, but they're kind of global in a weird way. They're just global because here you need a name that you can reference. And so for us, we just, we've got JavaScript, so let's just make a way of doing animations with this little as possible. Right, and if I should go backwards. Yeah, right. So it's just CSS. It's just a few different preambles around it, right? But the result is a single file, right? The benefit of bringing in HTML or bringing in markup into JavaScript is about your delineation of thought, of being able to consider this whole thing as a complete unit and not have internal structure that you always have to worry about. When it comes to CSS, it's the global scope. You have classes that are always out in the global scope, and CSS Modules was designed to target that one problem. It's like, now you don't have a global scope, so you don't have to worry about the internals of these things. This just goes the next step. What you can then do with this next step is why I'm using it now on all my projects, because it's not just a superficial replacement. Now you have JavaScript whenever you have a problem. So let's do that same thing with a logo. Let's just make one of them go backwards. So we can just arbitrarily define extra attributes to these things, because this is all our stuff, and I can go is it reverse? Right. And so what I've done there is that this is a magic string, right? So normally, if you tried to put a function inside a string, it would just come out as, it would two-string the function and it would just be garbage. It wouldn't be CSS at all. But we can do magic with it, basically. We can hold this thing and defer it, so that when the component gets rendered, we can look at what properties it has, where we can execute the function. And anything this function returns, we can inject into the source. It's complicated underneath to get it all working, but the output is great because now we can arbitrarily add these things to basically say header dark, and then go up to here and we have a variant here which actually here we say props dark. That one's dark. Or we can do things like default values like that. And because it's just strings, we basically just have JavaScript in order whenever we have a coding problem. So in that sense, it's much more like a replacement for something like Sass, which is a language of constructs built on top of CSS in a dialect that's valid CSS or valid enough CSS. This is just trying to take all the CSS parts and then put it in touching distance of JavaScript. So yeah, and that's now we have changeable public APIs that change the styles that are rendered, and it's all done dynamically, and it's all nice. But hopefully, to me, this was as good as we could get it, right? Without needing a build step or a Babel transform or something crazy. This reads as good as I could possibly come up with after a few months of work. Yeah.
With your descendants like this, can you reference another style component?
Yeah. We got an open issue about it. It's a real pain. So and it's all because of the way React works. You need to be able to render. So the way that we get these class names. So you see that I'll get out of it. These two elements have totally different class names. They don't share anything. Let's just make this full screen. Jam this to the side. Actually, no. So here we have, we run auto prefixer, like a very small auto prefixer that doesn't add a lot of weight, just gets run inline. So these two things, this one has an extra line of CSS, this one doesn't, but they're just generated. Class names, and we don't use any multi-class stuff. And the reason is the way these classes are generated is we take whatever the CSS is as it's generated and then hash it so that it's unique, right? Problem with asking something to overwrite another style component as a descendant or something is that you need to know what that class, or you need to be able to target it somehow. And
could you like H2 with the reference?
Of which?
If you did the double sign racing, but reference the other component?
No, because it would render out the words object.
If you run it with the magic thing and then defer it to later, would that work?
The idea is you still have to generate CSS, and you still throw CSS in the head, so that CSS has to match that element. We're not doing anything crazy in the React world to actually reach across these boundaries. We're basically just generating CSS and attaching it to elements. We're trying to make as much CSS as possible, but when you don't have a guaranteed reference for an element, the idea is that if we can make it so much easier to just add a property to that element and to be able to just pass through like a public API and change something internally. The other thing, do you have a question?
If you're making header, I'm arguing for Glen. If you're making header here, it's probably its own component somewhere else, and H2 is internal detail you don't need to know about, nor do you need to care what class it has on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sometimes you want things to, for example, if you have input inside, let's say, table yourself or some description,
Yeah.
it may naturally look a little bit different. And rather than having the implementer have to worry about those details, ideally you have a standard UI kit that understands and reacts accordingly.
Well,
I would argue the other things. I would put the same bug in CSS Modules about doing the referencing.
Yeah. No, actually, it was the one thing. The reason we wanted to do it is because it came up in CSS Modules tracker a few times. So we have a different approach, and I'll demonstrate it. So let's say that your header, right, your component, your header thing, is in some cases let's get rid of the dark stuff. I don't like dark stuff. I like papaya whip. Let's say that what you might have had was props dot, sorry, I'm going to need this, aren't I? Oh, and that's not valid CSS, sorry, context switching. Let's say there would be something like a version of this which is underlined, right? Or uppercase. Uppercase is better, right? So you could have a function called uppercase. Right? Let me just make sure I got my syntax working. Right? You could do that. You could add it to this public API. Or you can do something else, which is called theming. Or, yeah, theming, I guess. There's not terrible. Well, it's not a bad example, but you could do this as other ways with CSS. So it's just a purely, a pure example for the sake of argument, where you could say that if there is some theme variable, some context, which says that they're uppercase. So let's just say alternate theme, right? If we're in some environment. So normally this will work without, it won't render this thing. But what we can do is we have a React specific thing called theme provider, and we can wrap this thing. This is where you have to use object syntax because there's no better way. What do I call it? I call it alternate theme. And now what we've done, and this to me, so CSS custom properties, the CSS variable spec is going to let you build these components that can adapt. You set properties somewhere, and this thing just works, right? So it reads your column gutter, it reads your font hierarchy out of these CSS custom properties and just renders itself, and it will always work. And to me, it's going to make a big difference to how people share code. But given that the support for CSS variables it's pretty good now for modern browsers. Still, if you're not going to be just supporting brand new browsers for the next few years, you won't be able to use it because there's no good polyfill. I will look for other ways to implement the same idea. So how about we change this idea here and we go, rather than having alternate, let's just say this is foreground, right? And now we say foreground is pale violet red. No, let's do tomato. I like tomato. And background is papaya whip. Always papaya whip. Ah, damn it. No, it's just a color property. Now, if we took the same thing and we had it outside, well, we're going to need some backgrounds. Obviously, we're going to need some fallbacks. Actually, let's reverse that. So now we have the exact same markup here. In fact, we can even render this into its own component, right? We have this unit that doesn't care about this stuff. So right, and I'll just do it for okay, let's see how fast I can do this. Oh, not very fast. Oh, I've done this a lot recently. Oh, that's the wrong one. All right, now we jump across to here and we go, you, don't need you anymore. What else do we have? We need the, this is taking longer than I thought. Logo. What else? Logo. No, animation. Oh, what a demo. So smooth. Tell me. Ah, keyframes. See how look how easy it is to work with styles in JavaScript. So the point here is that this component is completely ignorant of its surroundings, except that if you send it a background and foreground, it'll figure it out. And if you don't, it has its own styles. And that, to me, is such a powerful concept because it means that every time you have this library of reusable components, they can just adapt. Whatever the theme is, whatever their environment is, they'll just render themselves correctly. So we're currently in this big kind of long process of speccing out exactly how far this could be taken, because you could arguably change a lot of the internals of each component based on the theme. And that completely supplants the need to be able to reach into components and override stuff if you have control of the authoring of that component in the first place.
I guess if you don't, then you can't do much about that.
Well, you can reach into its tags, you can reach into its structure, you can select on any element that it gives you, but you just can't. I mean, the idea is if you're trying to reach into a styled component, the idea is styled components has also given component authors a way to make things customizable.
So why do you use this as context over?
Because now this header element has no properties. It has no public API. It has an implicit styling API.
Is the thing by using context?
Yes. Yeah, it has to do a bit of a dance. But if we put the theme provider further out, then they'll both look like that. But put them here. So there's nothing about direct children or stuff. You can have tons of elements in here. Oh, that didn't work at all. Oh, that's broken. Yeah, it doesn't, there's no direct kind of children stuff here. And this to me is like trying to really take what React can do and expose it in a way that I would like to work with it, rather than a way that seems like the easiest possible way to interact with it.
This solves that.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas CSS Modules, because it doesn't have a mechanism, because it doesn't hook into the render cycle. Yeah.
But before you show the implementation of output for caching and fonts, I was going to ask, is there a plan to make that a webpack or a plugin to do this ahead of time instead of shipping a CSS parcel to the browser?
Yeah, we've got a bit of, we're in the middle basically of a big discussion about that, because I may as well explain the big problem is that, let's say here, so we have this backwards thing. If you do animation direction forwards, then initial maybe, right? Then it's the fact that this, which is a dynamic section, appears before a line that overrides it. That means that it doesn't apply, and if you reorder those things. And any kind of approach to try to extract static and dynamic parts and separate them is going to need some careful consideration about how to resolve those things when things run, So even at the moment, if you say, like, hover over something and change the properties and re-render stuff, then we will keep generating different class names, right? And in fact, I've got kind of like a test here where this is generating a new class for every different color, just as like a stress test. They all go next to each other so that you don't, if you have something that has a direct descendant or something, it doesn't suddenly appear in a different part of the CSS. That's the sort of stuff that is really tricky to keep consistent. And so while we would like to be able to ship a static CSS file, it's not, and we actually have some work, there is a Babel transform there already to extract the CSS stuff. It's really not trivial. And in fact, it might be better to, yeah, we don't know yet. Yeah.
Is there a way to do sort of composition stuff like CSS Modules, just big chunks of reusable styles?
Yeah, I mean, it's just strings. So we can take these three things and go, all right, this is now my styles.header-ish stuff, right? And then I can do import styles from styles.js. Yeah, it's all deferred. What did I call it now? Why did I use such a silly name? The only thing that you have to be aware of is that if you want to do anything clever, crafty, delayed in here, you have to use an internal thing. Oh god, oh I can't type at all. And you just do that. The reason being that these aren't real strings, these are magic strings, and so anything can be just represented as a string, you can just use a string, but if you want to use anything clever, you have to show that up. And I think that'll work. Yeah, it does. So things like flexbox properties, you have an alias for being like centered flexbox, centered horizontal flexbox, or you typographical stuff. So instead of using a composition which adds an extra class, you just add another chunk of CSS. So auto prefix, if you compile it for the browser, is 1 megabyte, because it has the can I use database for every like the usage information back to IE6, which isn't all that useful. We actually use one of the other styles in CSS and JavaScript, kind of light auto prefixer, because you don't really need that much anymore. Like this kind of approach, you're probably going to be shipping products that are IE10 plus, and so there's a lot of prefixes you can just do away with. There's nothing in this that won't work on IE9, I don't think, but nobody's asked us to try it because we have a few. Yeah, there's a bunch of people using it now, but only a bunch. So, but theoretically, there's no problem. Yeah, so, well, the thing is that there are good JavaScript color manipulation libraries, right? And every time that you're trying to do, like, you think about your dev tools, you think about throwing exceptions, you think about all the feedback mechanisms working with JavaScript will give you, debugging, doing everything like those kind of manipulations in JavaScript is more consistent, because really, when you're talking about using a polyfill for a future spec, you kind of just, you are kind of breaking with what you know works. You're just like learning this new syntax and trying it out and making sure it works. And to me, that's actually better to use a JavaScript library to do that because, yeah, the feedback is better. But to stick with CSS for everything.